Let's start today's video by a read-along. A new bill in Utah that would have required students to learn about consent was shut down by lawmakers this week. BU 177, introduced earlier this year, would have updated Utah's health education curriculum by requiring schools to teach consent, sexual violence behavior prevention, and sexual assault reduction strategies. This bill was shut down. So why, you might be wondering, would schools not want to teach consent and sexual violence prevention to our children? Let's talk about that. Hello there, my beautiful, lovely, delightful, and talented internet friends. Welcome back to Trauma Talk. I am Joe, your host, and today we have co-hosting Miss Sophie. She's curled up in the corner pretending that she wants to get out that door, but she actually doesn't, because as soon as I open it, she just looks up at me confused and sits right back down. Just a couple days ago, as I discussed in the intro, there was a bill that was proposed that would teach consent and sexual assault prevention to students in Utah, and that bill was shot down. It did not pass. And I think this is something that's really important to talk about because I often talk about consent and trauma and the lasting damage that is caused by sexual trauma and by sexual abuse and sexual crimes. So why in the world would anyone not want to teach young people who are just discovering their sexuality healthy ways of dealing with that, healthy ways of having conversation, what consent is all about, recognizing dangerous or toxic patterns, prevention of sexual assault and abuse? I can tell you why. Starting out, I wanted to share a little bit about my own background as I think it lends some insight to what is happening. I was raised in a conservative Christian church. I wasn't Mormon, but I was very much taught abstinence-only education. I was homeschooled and I went to youth group, and those were pretty much my entire worlds. And at neither location did I ever have actual sex education. The only conversations I ever really had about sex were don't do it, it's bad outside of marriage, and if you do it, God will low-key think poorly of you for the rest of your life. So you better stay a virgin because that's the most important thing that you can be. I'm not kidding when I'm saying this is what church has taught me. The idea of teaching adolescents about sex and about choice and consent and how to have conversations around that was unacceptable because that suggested that someone would be having those conversations, that someone would need to know what consent is because they might decide to have sex. And we can't have that, can we, if abstinence is the only option? So there was no education. And we see this reflected in Utah right now, which is a highly religious state that is in many, many ways influenced by the rich and powerful Mormon church. And now we're seeing public schools being denied consent-based teaching curriculum about sex education that would help our young people make sense of sexuality and understand as they're developing this sense of themselves, how to have those conversations and experiences in ways that are healthy for all parties involved. But no, we can't do that, because the only acceptable option is abstinence. There seems to be this idea, both in what I experienced and what is currently happening in Utah, that if we just don't talk about it, teenagers aren't gonna think about it. So let's not give them knowledge, education, or resources. Let's just say don't do it and leave it at that, because then they're not gonna do it. But abstinence-only education does not work. That has been proven over and over again. Counties and school systems where abstinence-only education is promoted, it does not decrease the rate of teen pregnancies. So when you deny adolescents the tools that are needed to understand how consent works, to understand that yes means yes, no means no, and enthusiastic, informed consent is really important, you end up with people who are equipped to have unhealthy relationships because they were never given tools to process this, to think this through. Like I said, I am one of those kids. I was never given tools to understand anything about sex or sexuality. I cannot tell you how uninformed at age 20 I was about sex in general, or about anything related to that, like consent or anatomy. There wasn't really any actual knowledge or education that was passed on aside from don't do it, meaning that when I started having romantic relationships, I was woefully underprepared to have any idea what was going on or what might happen, or to know what I wanted or didn't want, or how to voice that, or to understand that if someone didn't listen, if I did voice it, that that was wrong. Abusive relationships and situations are really really complicated regardless of the kind of education you have, but I can tell you that if I had had the tools to understand a little bit more about intimacy and consent and how to have conversations around this and what belonged to me, that my body was my own, that I got to make choices about that, and if someone else made choices about that for me, that was wrong, I believe that I would have been able to recognize what was happening a lot sooner and maybe blame myself a little bit less. Here's the other thing, when teachers and adults in your life are not talking to you about sex, sexuality, consent, you're gonna find that information other places because it certainly exists. There's a multitude of evidence for the fact that teenagers watch porn. Like, it's definitely not a great place to get the foundation of your sexual education. And yet that is the place that a lot of teenagers are going because they want to know about and understand and have an idea of sex and how it works. And so a lot of the education that they get is from the adult entertainment industry, which is not a great place, like I said, to learn the foundation of consent. Another thing that blows my mind about this is that people need to know about consent in marriage too. Currently, the way that the school system is taught is all about like abstinence only until marriage, but consent is equally as important to know and understand in a married relationship as it is outside of that. No always still means no, even if you have married someone. It is absolutely absurd and ridiculous to me that religious ideas, religious philosophies are allowed to govern governmental systems. One of the biggest reasons that this is not passing is because, like I said, the Mormon Church has a very strong hand in government and in policy in Utah, and they think sex before marriage is bad and sinful, so they're not gonna allow their young people to have education on what healthy sexuality might look like. This needs to change. Like I said, I'm passionate about this for a lot of reasons, but because I'm living proof of the fact that not being taught about consent, not being taught about sex or sexuality at all has a lasting impact on you. If we ever want to help the issue of sexual assault and sexual abuse improve, it starts by teaching young people healthy ways of looking at sex and sexuality and relationships and power dynamics in relationships and consent. This needs to stop. I sincerely hope that abstinence-only education is eradicated throughout our country, perhaps the world as well in the near future. If someone wants to choose to be abstinent, that's a fantastic choice. If it's their choice, for them, made by them, about their own bodies. But forcing people into thinking that that is the only acceptable option and refusing to tell them anything else is causing active harm to people. I am a firm believer in the idea that the world can and will get better if we continue to raise our voices and talk about things that matter. This is something that matters, and if you ever have the opportunity to have a conversation with someone about this to influence officials or policy, do so. It is really important that our young people understand that the youth of tomorrow, that the people who are going to be governing the world in a few years understand consent, understand what sexual assault and abuse look like, understand ways to prevent that, understand how to have healthy conversations, and don't feel only a sense of shame when it comes to their sexuality, because that messes people up. I can tell you that firsthand. A huge thank you from the bottom of my heart to all my patrons over on Patreon for supporting these videos, for keeping this channel going. You mean the world to me. Thank you. If you're interested in what Patreon is, or if you want to support this channel and get involved in a cool community and get some cool perks along the way, I put a link on screen and also down below. But to you watching this video right now, you could be anywhere else in the world doing anything else, and you chose to hang out with me and chat and listen to me speak for a few minutes, and I truly appreciate that. I love you guys. I'm thinking about you, and I will see you in the next video. Bye guys.